Okay, we're starting with wisdom literature. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Wisdom of Solomon, and the Apocrypha, and Job, and this is it's good stuff, actually. And Proverbs is usually up there with everybody's favorite books of the Bible. So I want us to learn how to read it. So I'm going to talk about, first of all, these books are written in poetry. And reading Hebrew poetry is not reading Shakespeare. It's different. It's ironically, it's written in such a way that what makes it poetry survives translation. I mean, iambic pentameter, for example, does not survive translation unless you have Alexander Pope doing it, and he's on a whole different plane. He wrote an essay on criticism in iambic pentameter. That's just that's not human beings. That's a visit from a cherub. So but Hebrew poetry, and I wrote my dissertation on the question of meter in Hebrew poetry, 525 pages, 10 years. And my friend said, I can summarize it in a single sentence. There is no meter in Hebrew poetry. Exactly. And that's just it. So what does mark poetry? Because if we're going to read poetry, we got to know what it's about. A very simple definition of poetry is the best words in the best order. And that captures everything, because word order will be manipulated for effect. It's the best words. It's rarely going to be a cup. It's going to be a chalice or something like that. You get the idea. The best words in the best order. And in Hebrew poetry, and that's true of all poetry, by the way. And in the Bible, your poetry is marked off differently as a rule. Is that showing up? Yeah. It sounds like bees. Sounds like we're about to get attacked by bees. No. I just don't want to get attacked by bees.
Why don't they stay in there?
Yeah. Notice how this is laid out on the right. Can you see it? So at breaks and stuff. Now let's compare that with, say, Exodus. There, it's paragraph stuff, right? So your English translations, that's new ones. If you're still reading King James, God bless you. But they're laid out like this to illustrate how it works. There are 4 characteristics of poetry. The first one is parallelism, which I'm going to explain in a second. I'm just going to skip that. The other is terseness. In fact, in my analysis, it was pages of statistical analysis. There is an average of 3.5 words per Hebrew line. 3.5 words tells you something. Okay, first of all, it's not meter, it'd be 3 words per line. But yeah, it tends to be short. So terseness. The lines tend to be of equal length. It's not absolute, but they tend to do that. So 3 and 3 words or whatever is what you'll find. And being poetry, I like figurative language. Now, what is parallelism? Well, I'll just do it to you because it's the one I memorized. A wise son gladdens his father. 3 parts to that. Wise son gladdens his father. But a foolish son, wise son, is his mother's grief. father, mother. Do you see the connections there? And gladdens versus grief. That's parallelism, that there are corresponding ideas between the lines. They're not synonymous. We use the term synonymous parallelism. That's one type, but that's not really what's going on. A famous scholar said, if you talk of it having two lines, it's line A and what's more line B. That's kind of how the poetry works. A wise son gladdens his father, and what's more, a foolish son is his mother's grief. Are you following me? That so that's parallelism, and there are all kinds. We will see it in spades in Proverbs. Sally Ann, your daughter's walking around. Just letting you know that. So when you read Hebrew poetry and you have this parallelism, the key is pay attention. There's a movement. And let's look at the movement in the ones I just did. In fact, let me type it up so we can look at it. Okay, fine. We'll do it this way. And you cannot hold me for spelling. All right. Do I need to make that bigger, or can you see that? What? I'm just making sure. So wise goes with foolish. Son and just repeated. Father and mother are an obvious word pair. If I say sun, you're going to say moon, that sort of thing. Father, mother, son, daughter. There are certain word pairs that are obvious in all cultures. And then gladdens to grief. Now, so what's the movement? First of all, when we go from wise to foolish, what you want to notice is, well, there's a switch. He's offering a contrast, right? Wise versus foolish. Are you with me? So this is contrast. Son's repeated, and the repeating of the word helps because it ties the two lines together. And it forces you to deal with wise and foolish as a pair. Okay, so he's contrasting a wise son with a foolish son. And then father and mother, it's a word pair that also ties the line together. So we got son repeated and an obvious word pair. So the two lines are tied very tightly. And so he wants you to contrast wise and foolish and gladdens with grief. Now, so far, so good. But notice what happens from gladdens to grief. What is gladden? What part of speech is that? I didn't hear you.
Verb.
Correct. That is a verb. But what is grief? It's a noun. We go from what a wise son does, he gladdens his father, to what a foolish son is. And so there's a movement of intensification here. That's found only in thinking about it. It's not like there's a natural intensification from gladdens to is, but the sentence construction, oh wow. So what his son does to what he is. You can change your behavior. It's very hard to change you. And so this is an intense form of comparison here. So we'd call this antithetical parallelism, by the way. That's enough for that, I think. Now, So that's basically how you read it. And it could be 2, 3, 4, 5 lines even. Depends on what you're dealing with. As a rule in Proverbs, they're parallels or couplets. Is what you get. Now I want to talk about who wrote this stuff. Who are the wise people? The text, the Bible actually gives us some ideas. So I want to look at some of it. So Moses is talking to the people. He says, choose for your tribes wise, understanding, and experienced men, and I will appoint them as your heads. More precisely be, choose for your tribes wise men, understanding men, knowledgeable men. So as far back as Moses, you had a category known as wise. And notice he's contrasting it with those who understand and those who know. So what is wise? We'll get to that. So we have wisdom movement, and a movement is actually like, there's an actual movement. There are people that make their living being wise people. And it's in many, many cultures. Not just the Hebrew, but the Canaanites, the Akkadians, the Egyptians. David liked wise guys. It's fun to say it that way. And Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman. That's an interesting thing about the wisdom movement. It wasn't limited to men. Okay. Priests, only women. Prophets, you get the occasional prophetess, and wise women as well. Those two were a little more open. But he sent a wise woman. Now, why would he say that? That's probably because she makes her living doing this. That's why she's easily identified. And by Jeremiah, so okay, what would that job look like? Well, I'll get to that. So Jeremiah's in trouble. He's prophesied and the people want to kill him. Just FYI. Because it's fun being a prophet. And the plotters have come together and said, look, let's make plots against Jeremiah. If we kill him, it's not as if the law shall perish from the priest, or counsel from the wise, or the word from the prophet. And what I want you to see, these are 3 ways you can make a living in the ancient world. A priest, you worked in the temple, got your living from that. And what were they in charge of? Torah. Or it's not like the Torah will cease, there's the word Torah, from the priest. Nor the word from the prophet. What is the prophet? And the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel saying. How many times do we read that in the prophets? So it's a word from the Lord. That's what they're in charge of. And so what are the wise in charge of? Counsel. Advising. This is what they do. Now, how are they going to make their living doing that? They're going to work for the court or for rich people. Otherwise, they're not making their living that way. They're just somebody that's wise, and some people will listen to them. But if you can make your living, it's because you're connected. And they may even we are wise, and the Torah of Yahweh is with us. But behold, the lying pen of the scribes has made it into a lie. The wise men shall be put to shame. They shall be dismayed and taken. Behold, they've rejected the word of Yahweh. So what wisdom is with them? There seems to be a connection between scribes and wise men in this verse. And so scribes may have been considered part of the wise class. For what it's worth, because you had to learn to write, obviously, if you're going to be a scribe. All right. So what is a wise person? This is important for our understanding Proverbs. A wise person is somewhat, well, in fact, why don't I just write it down? I like writing. And you're going, man, I didn't know I was coming to a college lecture. A wise person is one who ponders the good life. Of course, if I could spell, it would make it nicer, but you try typing with a stroke. There we go. You ponder what the good life is. What is the good life? And based on their own experience, good grief. There we go. So what they experience and the experience of the ages, what they've been taught. They hand down what they get taught by others. They make conclusions. This is universal. This is what's going on in Egypt. It's what's going on in Babylon. It's what's going on in Canaan. It's what's going on in Bethlehem. It's how wise people work. What is the good life? By the way, what does that sound like? Yeah, that's what philosophers did in Greece. Which in philosophy is just the Greek version of the wisdom movement. You'll read that the philosophers were more esoteric and the wise people were more pragmatic. That's not really true, but it's still defining what is the good life. And the wisdom movement, then, it's just those people who share their conclusions, write them down and pass them on to others. That's the wisdom movement. And that is what we're going to be reading. So the wisdom movement is not limited to Israel. We read in the Bible that Sisera in Judges 5, which is the story of Deborah. Sisera is the Canaanite commander. Sisera's mom, counseled with the wise women. Edom was famous for its wisdom, according to Jeremiah. Babylon, of course, Daniel. What we saw earlier, Jeremiah, wise people could write. If you're a professional, you could write. Now, we don't know the extent of literacy in the ancient world. We do find signs, and we have found notes. They'd pick up a piece of pottery on the ground and scribble a note and pass it on. So it was more extensive than we might think. But was it universal? We don't know. Now, when they summarized their conclusions, they tended to do it in two different ways. One's called the prudential, which is the proverb. A wise son gladdens his father, and a foolish son is his mother's grief. Boom, sink, pass it on, next topic. Or they might go on an extended discussion. Job, Ecclesiastes, long discussions on what wisdom is. All right. Now, I've covered that. I want to set up Proverbs. And you're going, are we going to look at Proverbs? Probably not today. but we're going to get started. Proverbs gives us, it's not just Solomon, as we'll see, there are others, but this is a work of the wisdom movement, professionals. Okay, so it's Job, so it's Ecclesiastes. But Job and Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, there are these longer reflective things, and they're going after a particular thing. Proverbs is your basic, this is freshman 101 wisdom movement. Proverbs. And so we start there because it gives us what the wisdom movement's saying. But there's some things you should know when you read Proverbs. In Proverbs, there's a worldview that's being espoused, and I want you to appreciate it and understand it. In Proverbs, do you like that for effect? Keep you hanging. Everybody starts out as young and untrained. You can't avoid that. Young, you're young. How old are you? Exactly. I am not 22. I dare say Diane's not 22. But you start out young. If you live long enough, you'll take care of the young part. It just takes care of itself. The untrained is different. You have to be intentional about doing that. But you can't help but be untrained. You don't know anything. You're 22. So you have to go to school and you learn and you have to live. And even when you go to school, you get yelled at by a guy that's been doing it for 30 years. Said, what were you thinking? So in Proverbs, everybody starts out as young and untrained. And then by the decisions they make, they become either wise or a fool. That's your goal. And if I had a drawing tool, I would draw a line straight down and it branches out. But it's by the decisions that you make. So I'm going to put an X here. X is the decision. In Proverbs, they're not Calvinists. There's a little bit of determinism in the world, but your life, it's a sum total of the choices that you make. That's the way they look at it. And what they're teaching you, what the book is intended to do, is to teach you how to make wise choices. And the problem is, you're making choices continually all day long. Now you came to Sunday school. That's a wise choice. You're listening. That's a wise choice. Now you're playing with your phone. That's a fool's choice. You know what I'm saying? It's just constant. Constant, yes.
So I don't want to get ahead of you, but anyone could be a wise man.
Now, in the abstract, not as a professional. But the point of Proverbs, and you'll see the way Proverbs is written, it's not from the professor to a student. It's a parent to a child. Father to a son, mother to a child. And it's because anybody can learn to make wise choices. Now, whether you make your living as a wise person, that's not its goal. But they are trying to teach you to make wise choices. And one of the first things they do is make you own that it's your choice and that you have to own the decisions you make. So everybody starts out as young and inexperienced or untrained. There are Hebrew words for this. And by the choices you make, you're either wise or you're a fool. All right, now, I'm going to open something now. I always tell when class is going well because you guys just sit there.
I'm gonna start telling my students that come into my office plans for next year? And they go, oh, I don't know, I would say, maybe you should be a wise man.
Why not?
Sounds a lot better than wisdom.
Yeah.
I just need to know what college to send them to and what degrees they should choose on their application to be like.
Well, here's the thing, like philosophy as a whole in general, there's not a lot of people who are philosophers just by trade. The majority of well-known philosophers had, like, they wrote as part of their life, but they also had an occupation separate from it. That was common. So many of, like, who you think of as great philosophers had other jobs. And C.S. Lewis, for instance, was a professor, but we also think of him as a philosopher.
You're wiser than most. All right, let's look at the book of Proverbs directly. The title of the book is The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. What is a proverb? That would be a nice thing to know, don't you think? We do that. Well, Proverbs. And so you just showed us one. A wise son gladdens his father, but a foolish son is his mother's grief. Here's the title. Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Well, there's the word for proverb, which I give you right down here too. A proverb's just a comparison. That's all it is. So Jesus' parables are proverbs. They're extended a little bit longer. But when you say this and that and you set them side by side, you're doing a proverb. Okay. Now Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. We're going to see that the book of Proverbs actually has sections, and I give these to you here. And the opening title, which is 1:1 through 9:18, which is all of chapter 9. But chapter 10, we get another title. It says the Proverbs of Solomon. So it's a separate section, goes through into the middle of 22. And then we're going to get a part called the Words of the Wise. Not Solomon. These are other proverbs. And then a statement, these also belong to the wise. Short, but nevertheless. These also are proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, transcribed. So now we have a date. Solomon, in case you didn't know, is just after 1000 BC. David is 1000 BC. Solomon's after. It's actually 987 to 937 of Solomon. And Hezekiah is in the 700s. Okay, so that's 250 years later. So Proverbs was a collection that grew over time. That's very clear. And then we get the words of Agur, son of Yaqet, the Mathite, and that's subject to different translation, but clearly not Solomon. And then the words of Lemuel, king of Massah, which his mother taught him. So there are, somebody count those. How many sections do you see? 7. Well, of course there's 7. What would you expect it to be? 6? No. This is Proverbs, man. All the numbers matter. 7 is, it's just a number that has to be. So 7, there are 7 sections. We're actually going to go through Proverbs. I want to set you up some vocabulary, though. What's interesting to me is Proverbs 1 through 7. It's this opening section of the book, and it lays out all this vocabulary. It gives us a mashal, that's a proverb, a comparison. It talks about a militzah, a satire or mocking poem. They do those too. Hakamim are just wise saying. It's from the word for wise. They even have chidas, riddles. Different types of knowledge. Binah comes from the preposition being, to be between. And binah is the ability to tell the difference between. So to discern, if you will, understand, Okay, you can break it apart and put it back together. Da'at, which is this term, is our basic word knowledge. But in Hebrew, it often has a connotation of experiential knowledge. It's not limited to that. I mean, if you do, if you read a science textbook or something, then that's da'at. But da'at is usually, he jumped off that cliff and didn't survive. I don't think I'll do that. That's da'at. It's experience. Or worse yet, I jumped off the cliff and broke my leg. I don't think I'll do that again. Da'at. But to help you also remember, when Adam got Eve pregnant, he knew her. This is the verb that's used. He knew her. He experienced her. So intimate experience is da'at. Musar shows up a lot. It's a word for discipline. Chokmah is the big word. Everybody say chokmah. That's wisdom, which is this applied knowledge. Sekel is prudence, or in later Hebrew, it becomes a word for wisdom. But in the biblical stuff, it's more like, prudence. Lekach is from the verb to take. I just took my drink. But it becomes a verb for education. So all you teachers in here, given that, whose responsibility is education? The student or the teacher? And this is great at this point in the lecture to go, yeah, it's y'all's responsibility, not mine, to get this. And then orma is shrewdness. It's a homonym with the word for naked, interestingly enough. And so it's the ability to see things as they are, if you will. Now, the type of people that Proverbs talks about, a hacham is a wise person. Now, what's interesting is this word is used in a number of different places where it clearly means something like skilled. A jeweler is described as hacham. Sailors, professional mourners, people you hire to do your funerals, they're called hakam because they're good. Or any sort of artists, women who spin, goldsmiths, and so forth. These are all hakam. So this is why it's the applied knowledge. A navon is from that same word too, from being between, it's smart, what it really is. Now, petit, I already erased it. Remember we had the young and the inexperienced. A petit is the inexperienced. And often translated naive, but that's not really it. But they're untrained. They have no experience. And a veal, not evil, and a veal is a fool. And that is the opposite of a chacham. And a na'ar, it's just a word for boy. So it's the youth. So we're going to stop here because it is 10:15 when we set the stage for Proverbs. Just one thing to keep you with. So, given our definition of what a wise person is and what they do, something to meditate on between now and Proverbs 1:1 next week is Proverbs are not promises. They're observations. And that's makes a big difference in how you read the book. They're not promises, they're observations. Things that make you go, All right. You guys just sitting there. This was not a big class for you to say anything, I guess. Any questions? Okay. Do we have any prayer requests? I can stop recording if you like. You don't like the prayer request?